Welcome to Devotions from Israel, a 5-minute word of encouragement. Today's devotional comes from 1 Samuel chapter 24. The Judean Desert is a very dry and weary land where there is no water, says Psalm 63. And yet there are a few exceptions to this. One of those is a natural spring called Gedi. Now, Gedi, as you see behind me, is a canyon today. It's filled with waterfalls and quiet pools where Israeli citizens and tourists alike come to refresh themselves. It's a fun place to hike. In fact, we hike typically when we're there back to the furthest of the falls. We get wet, and that really feels good, especially on a 105-degree dry heat type of day. Well, this story has some history to it. The story that unfolds in chapter 24. Perhaps you want to read the entire story on your own. But leading up to chapter 24 is chapter 18 to 23. Now, in chapter 17, David killed Goliath, and Saul is extremely jealous about this. So from 18 to 23, David is on the run. In fact, about 10 locations are listed in Scripture where David is hiding from King Saul. In fact, prior to this chapter 24 unfolding, David is very, very close. And now here comes this chapter 24. They're both here at this spring called Gedi, certainly because this was the primary place to find water. Well, David is hiding from King Saul. He must have seen Saul in the area, so to protect himself and his men, he's way back in a cave. Now, there are many caves today in Gedi, but we can't really tell which cave this may have been. However, the story almost opens up with a bit of humor because Saul happens to be in the same cave. And let's just say Saul is taking care of business. He's relieving himself. And this would have been a golden opportunity for David to kill Saul. But he chose not to, even though his men, David's men, suggested that he do so. So after Saul leaves, David speaks to Saul. He holds the piece of the robe that he cut off and identifies himself. And Saul, seeing that it was David, it's a tender moment, actually weeps. And yet David, we have to ask ourselves, what encouraged him not to kill Saul? What prevented him? After all, these last 6 or so chapters, David has been on the run. You think that getting even was perhaps in the cards. But David chose to honor the Lord's anointed. Could it be that David found encouragement even in this time of adversity by recognizing God as his helper? This is what we read in chapter 54 of the book of Psalms. David writes, "O God, save me by your name, and vindicate me by your might, O God. Hear my prayer, give ear to the words of my mouth. For strangers have risen against me, ruthless men seek my life, like Saul. They do not set God before themselves. But behold, God is my helper. The Lord is the upholder of my life." I find great encouragement in this, in that David, while experiencing these journeys of adversity, the unknown of what tomorrow may have brought him. And yet, here he chose not to get even with Saul. And yet, I think the reason is because he trusted in God. David's already been anointed himself to be king, and yet God really showed his favor and his faithfulness to David. And I think David's actions here in En-Gedi displayed a full trust in him. So be encouraged today. I don't know what journey or adversity you are facing. Perhaps the unkind people or circumstances are pursuing you. Perhaps you feel as if you are entrapped by things that seemingly always are going in the wrong direction. But take courage, my friends. Be encouraged like David was here in En-Gedi. Trust in God. Make him your ultimate helper. So be encouraged today. Until next time. Shalom.